Thank you so much for joining us here on your Inside Track. And I wanted to dive right in because you're an expert on mindset, and I know the work that you and the other coaches at Rewire do is focused on supporting organizations, individuals in working more optimally, helping them achieve greater levels of success for themselves. But there's a big focus on the science behind the coaching that you guys do. What is the science behind what we think of as mindset? Because I feel like mindset is a term that just gets thrown around so casually these days.
Wow, that is the deep end of the pool. Yeah, I like it. We're diving right into the deep end. You know, what's interesting about your question, what is the science behind mindset? I got to tell you, if there are any neuroscientists or people that study neurochemistry or biology or gone through the coursework that I did through UCLA in interpersonal neurobiology or plasticity, anybody that's a doctor in this work, if they heard that question, their mind would probably just explode, right? Because I think you're asking it for a reason. The reason it gets thrown around there is because when you think about things like mindset, the mind, Stu, like there might not be anything more complex in the world. So I
Right.
don't actually know that there is one definition that would suffice to say what is mindset and what is the science behind mindset. And by the way, someone who's an MD that, studies the prefrontal cortex or studies, the limbic part of the brain, or versus someone who is a neuroscientist who studies more of, the abstract or how the brain does emotions. I just got to tell you, they'd probably all answer that question differently. And
Mhm.
but I don't want to evade it too much. I would tell you that I would probably lean towards Dr. Daniel Siegel's definition. He was the head of neurobiology at UCLA. He wrote a book called Mindsight. So if your show notes can reflect that, anyone that's
Mhm.
really into the work of mindset, Daniel Siegel, in my view, does as good a job as anybody in defining what the mind is, what a healthy mind is. And he talks about it being an embodied, the mind is both embodied and it's also a construct, so it's both part of our, so it's not just our brain. So what does it look like when it's healthy? And that I would get, he talks about what a healthy mind is like, but he takes an entire book to do so because it's so
Sure.
complex. So, what is mindset? What is the neuroscience behind mindset? I guess it just depends on who you're asking and what if they're coming at it from a neurochemical perspective or a neurobiological perspective. Dr. Daniel Siegel speaks about it be somewhere between the banks of chaos and rigidity. He calls flow. And when you're in flow, which athletes often talk about, and when they're in flow or in the zone, we are flowing down a river, and he speaks about what a healthy mind and actually how to get there. So don't know that I answer your question, but it's probably one of the biggest questions you could have started off with. So
Well, I
uh,
want to make sure we're giving the listeners what they're here for. And, I think what you did at least confirm is that there is science behind all of the stuff that we talk about here on the show. And, you bring up the concept of flow. I read the book Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and that book I felt was really informative for me in terms of understanding what flow is on a daily basis. And I think of like LeBron James or any other famous athlete, they're probably not like thinking super crazy hard about like they got to go like pay their rent at the end of the game or something like that. They're in the present, they're in the moment, they're playing the game. How do folks create that in their everyday endeavors, whether it's in the boardroom or with their kids? What does that look like?
I think it's a really good question, and there's a lot of people that have done a great amount of research in this. And I will tell you, you brought up LeBron James, but baseball players, but all athletes at that elite level have either hired someone or brought someone in to help them achieve it. So you and I agree on one thing: if they could achieve it all the time, they'd even be better than they are. It's a little
Yeah.
bit elusive, and the best of the best don't know how to be in it all the time.
Mhm.
Although they search for a way to be able to kind of contain it, like, right? I think it was Derek Jeter, that the baseball player, that spoke about when he can finally achieve that level of stillness. Baseball players have said this. They can literally see the seams on a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, but they can't do it all the time because flow is not something that we can just will at our command. So if your question is how you do it, I would tell you, learning, you said it yourself, it's how do we be present? How do we actually learn to be present? There's almost a synonym between the state of flow and learning to be in the moment. So a lot of your listeners, right, if you're talking about like, oh, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow and stuff, we have a tendency, especially achievers and people that succeed, have a tendency to be thinking in the future.
Mhm.
I'm all for planning. I'm all for having a vision for where we're going, but too many people live there. And when you're either too much in the future or too much in the past, you're missing the present. And present is when the mind gets still, that there's really great connectivity between the part of our brain, the higher level functioning of the prefrontal cortex, and say even the hippocampus or something in the limbic system. And that's the neurobiology of flow. How do you do it? I mean, there's a myriad of ways. I mean, I'll give you one way is learn to practice meditation. That's not the only way, certainly, but learning to still the mind for even 10 to 15 minutes a day. We know it grows the insular cortex. There's a great deal of research around that. I'm not telling you it will automatically get you flow, but it's certainly helpful.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you said it best, like if athletes or peak performers, the 1% of the 1% are paying people to support them and getting into flow states, maybe we just focus on being in the here and now and in the present. And something I want to ask you, because of the types of people that you coach, this all sounds well and good, but I got this board presentation. I got to land this account. Like my got to get my kids to soccer practice when I get home from work. For the fidgety skeptics out there who are like, "This is great, Steve, but I don't have time." What's the coaching you provide for those folks and supporting them in developing a habit like meditation?
I think it's a great question. I really appreciate the chat. It's almost a challenging question. There are a lot of people that think that, and I don't mean to be overly confrontational on your show, but I didn't say, hey, practice transcendental meditation and spend 3 hours a day doing it and being completely still and quiet. I said 10 minutes a day. So if you want to tell me that the kids go to school and this and that, you don't even have 10 minutes a day, then meditation's not your problem, right? Like we'd be digging in the wrong hole to help you with
Mhm.
that. But I want to suggest that almost everyone you know does have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
They do. And so if
Mhm.
you're saying I can't squeeze any more, like 10, no, well, then we have another thing that we should be focusing on and not meditation, which would be how are you organizing yourself and all kinds of different things. But so the first thing I would say is let's pay attention to things we're saying we can't do, because that's a narrative that we have about ourselves. And I would challenge that narrative as a coach. I do think you have 10 minutes. I think when you wake up, we can learn to establish some new habits, and you've got it. It's just a function of how do we align that in a way in our day. And so I don't mean to be confrontational, but I would challenge anyone that says they don't have 10 minutes in a day.
No, I'm actually really happy you went there because I think some people get to hear it. You know, if we're not taking the 10 minutes a day for ourselves, but we're losing an hour plus scrolling TikTok, like, do you actually not have the 10 minutes in the day, or is it just a matter of priorities?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. But that's a function of helping people examining how they think and doing it gently, right? Because there are
Mhm.
people listening to the show going, the heck with those guys. They don't know anything about my life. And meanwhile, you and I know they're looking at TikTok. But, if all of a sudden, you upset somebody or whatever, then we don't get the point across. So I would do that probably a little bit more gently and just kind of help
Sure.
someone see that they probably um with some ways that we can reorganize, they probably do have 10 minutes to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coaching is, I think, to some degree, supporting people, meeting them where they're at, and guiding them forward. And obviously, you can't name names, but are there any examples you can highlight for somebody who did instill a stillness practice and what it unlocked for them?
You're right. From a confidentiality perspective, I couldn't say exactly who, but I almost, in the line of work that I do, every one of my clients has had some incredible insights as a result of bringing in every one of them. I would have to narrow it down. Although I will say that when you said that, my brain did go to one individual in particular who was a very type A, self-proclaimed high, if you want the disc language or Myers-Briggs, very driven
Yep.
individual. And ultimately, there are many people that when you think about learning to be still would tell you like, like they would come to me, Steve, you don't understand my brain. It's going, it's going, it's going. I'm thinking, no, 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 no. And interestingly, the less you think you can practice stillness, the it's more than likely the more you need it.
Yeah.
The less you believe you can't do that, then the more that you need it. But if I was thinking about this one individual, ultimately what it means to get into that flow state, um, it's really all about choices. I had one client that came in that they were a CEO of a company, high achiever, like many of your people or wannabes. And they were very reactive. They'd get into
Mhm.
meetings and they were just, someone would say something, someone would do something, and they would react. After practicing meditation, after learning to be still, after practicing metacognition, which are processes that we work with people on, um, I actually had one of their colleagues reach out to me and go, whatever you're doing, this individual is not reacting nearly as much.
Wow.
So they were able to see themselves wanting to react and have just a way different understanding, which I think was made possible through the practice of learning to be still, as opposed to just always living life like it's cause and effect. Someone says something, someone does something, I react this way. And so when you learn to practice stillness and you learn to be in the present, you can get emails, your kids can say stuff, your colleagues can say stuff, and you observe yourself
Mhm.
respond. Okay. We never tell anyone don't feel that way, whatever. Emotions are there to teach us. And so you can see yourself respond. And as opposed to just going down a road that you do, you can look at it more objectively. And that's the practice of metacognition, seeing yourself think about how you think. And when you do that, I think that's made possible by learning to be still. Even again for 10 minutes. You don't have to do that all day long.
Yeah. Oh man, thank you so much for sharing that. And something that came to mind is I grew up playing sports. I played basketball very competitively through high school. I'm the father of a young soccer player. He wants to be the next great player for a European team. Obviously, we'll see how that turns out and, as he continues to develop, but I see a lot of other parents parenting their kids pretty harshly. And I feel like a lot of the messages I see getting instilled in children is that, particularly young boys, that it's not okay to have your feelings. It's not okay to sit still and be with your feelings. I know that you're working with folks as adults, and how does this present itself in some of the folks that you've been working with? And how do you uncover this, coach around it, and give people permission to tap into something that maybe they haven't before?
Wow, it's a really great question. Again, you're so far you've asked me some very, very deep questions, and in order to answer them effectively, it's almost like I would need space and time, but I'll do my best on the show. Like I reserve the right to come back and go, wait, I've got a better answer than that.
Well, we'd love to have you
Um,
back. So,
well, first of all, I would tell you that the entire field of emotional intelligence, which is something that many of your readers have at least heard about or know
mhm,
about or have read books about, I don't think it's even new anymore to suggest to somebody that look, you'll take more actions in your life based on how they make you feel and not necessarily how you reason.
Mhm.
So this concept spawned the entire field of emotional intelligence and positive psychology,
Yeah.
right? What, athletes at any level know that if they're stressed out, freaked out, worried about an outcome, this and that, like we're going back to athletes, and we're using athletes as a metaphor for all of us, right? Because it's the same
Yeah.
thing in the corporation. You want to be a great leader. If you come in and you're freaked out and wigged out and stressed out and you're stressing everyone else out, but you want them to perform, no athlete performs well under those conditions. So why would children? Why would we? So it's again, I'm sure there are different schools of thought on this, but it's generally understood if a child feels anger or frustration or worry, about the best thing you can do for that child, whatever the emotion is actually let them feel it and even help them name it and
Mm.
understand it, because that will give them a much greater capacity to move through it, to transcend whatever it is. So this is there's two great neuroscientific sayings that I can give you. One is this: if you can name it, you can tame it.
Wow. Never heard
and
that
then
one
one that
before.
and then one that Carl Jung, the great philosopher and psychologist, said this: what we resist persists.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you have an emotion and you're a child, or someone tells you don't feel that, or even don't feel emotions, well, here's something that we've understood. If you feel angry and you go don't feel anger, I'll give you, and again, forgive me for this silly analogy. Here's an analogy for you. You're into sports. And
Yeah.
maybe if you're not even into golf, I'm going to use a golf analogy. So if all the people think golf is dumb, just stay with me for 1 second. If you're standing holding a golf club, and between you and where you want to hit the ball is a lake, and your brain goes, don't hit it in the lake, don't hit it in the lake, don't hit it in the lake, where do you suspect that ball might go?
Right in the lake.
Because the brain doesn't hear don't, it's only drawing attention to the subject of what you put in front of it. Don't feel anger. Don't feel anger. That'll keep you pissed off for a long time. Don't be upset. Even telling people don't worry, which is very common to hear in our country. I have learned long ago not to tell people not to worry. I help people understand their worry. Because if you even say to yourself, don't worry about that, don't worry about that, worry, according to Carl Jung, will cling to you for the remainder of your days. So what we resist persists. And if we can get children and how it presents itself, by the way, all the people that I work with, and you too, and me, we're just bigger children. We use children as examples, but we're
Right.
just all humans. We got these brains. So absolutely helping people identify what their emotions are, understanding where they came from, making sense of them and not resisting them. And I don't care if you're a little boy, girl, like we all have these brains. And I think that's so much a healthier approach than telling someone not to feel a feeling.
Oh man, so so important. And I feel like so much of our society expects us to move on. Like if we lose a loved one, we're inherently in a grieving process of some kind. And the rest of the world moves on, but we still have the grief that we're processing through. And I feel like, I mean, grief is just an example, but so often we make our feelings wrong because we feel like we need to in order to fit into some type of either social norm or expectation of ourselves. But you're advocating that we just sit with what the feeling is and allow ourselves to experience it.
And maybe learn to ask some questions about it without judgment,
Got it.
whatever the feeling is. And for the record, I mean, again, I asked you a little bit about who the demographic of the people listening is, but if there's two of them now, but if you watched the movie Inside Out by Disney,
Yeah. Great movie.
okay, phenomenally accurate. Like Walt Disney brought on some of the most esteemed neuroscientists in the world to help them put that movie together, and it's absolutely amazing. And there are 5 key emotions, right, that are represented by those characters that were Amy Poehler and Lewis Black and all these people, right?
Yeah.
Joy, sadness, disgust, fear, and anger. And I always tell people, think of those 5 key emotions. If I said those to you, Stuart, like joy, fear, disgust,
Sadness, disgust.
sadness, right? Those 5. What does of those 5? Does anything jump out at you? Joy, fear, disgust, anger, and sadness. What jumps out at you?
There's only one that has like a really happy connotation.
Exactly. And even though joy, make no mistake, joy was kind of the key character in Riley's head. But you know who the hero of that movie is? Sadness.
Interesting. Can you elaborate?
Well, go watch the movie. She's the one that helps understand what's going on. And sadness ends up being more of a hero than joy is. And joy could never get rid of sadness. They actually portrayed that movie in a way where what they weren't good or bad, they were these things. And yes, we all want to feel joy, but if 4 of the 5, 80% of our emotions are ones that don't bring us elation or joy or euphoria or anything like that. Again, those things are good.
Mhm.
Man, it's going to be a crazy life if you try to negate or deny bad emotions. It's a part of life. And I loved what
Yeah.
you said. If you just had a death of the beloved, I'm not going to come to you and go, dude, don't feel sad. Come on, man, get over that. That'd be awful. Instead,
Yeah.
understand that and be with that. And I think to the degree to which we can teach our kids and ourselves that process, we can understand a lot more. And by the way, I'm not saying anything that isn't, go read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. And there are some really, really, really sharp people in the world that have pointed to this very thing.
I love that. I want to raise this question to you, kind of the opposite side of the coin. We're talking about avoiding the heavier emotions, the less positive emotions. Just to be vulnerable with you in my journey of self-discovery and growing up in the world, it became very apparent to me how much I make joy wrong. Like a pattern of mine is to make joy wrong. Like if I am not, grinding is like my comfort zone, like working, pushing the boulder up the mountain, so to speak. I am super comfortable being miserable, having an unattainable goal. I have a really hard time stopping and smelling the roses, enjoying small things like playing with my dog. How often do you feel like you see that in the coaching you do? And is there any suggestions you have for people who have struggled with this type of thing like I have historically?
Well, I didn't know we were going to turn your podcast into an actual coaching call. I mean, I'm going to have to bill you. It's a mess. We're going to turn this into a coaching call. What's super interesting is I guess I would say, how often do I see that? Let me give you a little bit of neurobiology to make you feel better. The brain has
Okay.
roughly 100 billion nerve cells, 100 billion. Off each nerve cell, on average, because it depends on where it is in the brain, there are these things called synapses, which are how the nerves actually talk to one another. You know how many synapses on average there are per nerve cell? If there's 100 billion, 100 billion,
Is it
there's
billions?
roughly about 10,000 synapses per nerve cell.
Wow.
10,000. So if you multiply 10,000 times 100 billion, you get 10 to the 15th power, right? One followed by 15 zeros. We don't even have a word in English. You could say 1,000 trillion, I guess, but there's no word for that in English.
Sure.
That's not the mind-blowing part. The mind-blowing part is the fact that that's just the number. It's not the sequential possibilities. If you think about the sequential
Wow.
possibilities of those neurons and cells, there was one neuroscientist that said he believes that there's more possibilities in the human brain than there are atoms in the universe.
Wow.
Now, it's incalculable, and who knows? When you come to me and go, hey, here's a particular thing that I have. Do I have these other things? Like, my brain goes to, I would want to focus in on you and your particular thing of not feeling that, because my guess is you brought that to my attention because you recognize it But the manner in which you expressed that to me, I can just suspect that it's not maybe taking you where you want to go.
Hmm.
There's got to be some problem with that. Otherwise, why bring it to my attention? Right.
Interesting.
Right. So if I asked you back, hey, is that how you want to live? Not appreciating walking your dog or seeing the colors of the sky or being present. I know you're comfortable with having your mind go, 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 go. Right. I get the comfort behind that. And by the way, you're familiar with it. And
Yeah.
for the record, just looking at you, seeing what's behind you, doing this podcast, you want to hear the craziest part of it? Frankly, it's worked at some level. You're not some slob on the street who's barely scraping by and getting food. And so your own brain says, oh, yeah, it works.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, and this is much more into the psychological part of it, not coaching. I mean, this would be acting more like a therapist, which I'm not a trained therapist, but
Sure.
ultimately, I would ask you some questions about, you'd have to identify how that behavior specifically is blocking you from a goal you want to achieve, or not getting
Yeah.
somewhere. Because if you ultimately can't see that because your brain's going, dude, frankly, it works fine and I'm good the way it is and I don't want to change. Well, then there's nothing for us to do. If it's not how you want to be and you know that you can achieve more, at that level, we could practice some metacognition together and I could help you. But here's one. Jim Collins, who wrote
Yeah.
Built to Last and Good to Great, and this, research scientist guy from, basically he's from Fort Collins, Colorado, I think. But anyway, or Boulder, somewhere up there. But he's got this saying, Stu, and he said, the enemy of great is good.
Mm-hmm.
You see, you practice certain things. Your brain does that. You can't feel joy, but frankly, your brain's going, but look around, man, it works. And so,
Yeah.
in order for you to achieve some other level, you'd have to sacrifice the thing that unconsciously your brain's telling you works so that you could, and that's a risk.
Yeah.
And you might wake up tomorrow and again, maybe unconsciously your brain's going, yeah, I don't want to risk that. I'm
Yeah.
fine the way I am. And you know what's going to happen if you don't change? Nothing. You probably will be fine until one day you go, I wonder what better looks like.
Bingo. Yes. And
And it might be your own child or a spouse or a friend coming and going, hey, bro, you're not present.
yeah.
And again, I don't know you well enough to tell you what that's going to be, but something could happen. But a smart guy like you could recognize it before something detrimental has to happen. And the way that you express that, being present, reducing cortisol and activating the brain could take your other skills and gifts and probably magnify them.
Yeah. Thank you. And for the record, I have done a lot of therapy. I've hired several coaches of my own along the way. And what I've learned, at least for myself, is somewhere along the way, somewhere in my past, I picked up the narrative in my mind that if I ever let my foot off the throttle, I was going to let somebody down. And at some juncture, that was going to mean I wasn't going to receive love in some way.
Yeah.
Typically from peers, but it's it might sound silly to some of the listeners, but slowing down to actually do the thing or make the choices that are actually going to be fun, and like it's okay to be fun and be light and be open and be free, and those are a challenge for me, but I make those each and every day. And my with my wife, we're actually working on planning a vacation currently, and we're really excited, and that's not something I would have been comfortable doing a couple years ago. And so I guess for anybody listening to this, like, just take a look, like, whether you're not allowing yourself to go there with some of the heavier feelings, any of your sadness, or if you're like me, if joy is the issue, just take a look. And if need be, there are plenty of amazing professionals out there who can support you in undoing or uncovering at least the why behind how these patterns got created for yourself.
Yeah, and that'll get you into a whole. We don't have time today to probably open the
Sure.
can of what is implicit and explicit memory. but I'll give you another movie to watch, or I'll give your listeners another movie to watch. See, they've got
Yeah.
3 books and 2 movies out of this. Like, I got to go look at the year. It might have been like early 2000s. Walt Disney did a movie. It wasn't animated. It was with Bruce Willis and Lily Tomlin called The Kid.
Interesting. I think I remember that when it came out.
It is worthy to go watch because it is, again, I don't want to give it away, but it's about Bruce Willis turning 40 and having all these experiences, some of them very much like yours. He is you. And this kid shows up in his life. And very soon into the movie, he realizes the kid is him.
Wow.
And
Wow.
he can't get rid of him. And it's a brilliant, brilliant movie. And on the one hand, you can watch it because it's Disney. Kids can watch it and it's kind of fun. But when adults watch it, there's some themes in it. Like even like I think Disney has a way of doing that. Like I think Finding Nemo, the kids can love Finding Nemo. There is more wealth in understanding overcoming fear in Finding Nemo than maybe any movie I've ever seen in my life.
Oh my gosh. I could go down the rabbit hole with you just on the psychology behind Finding Nemo.
Oh, but that's a dad that overcame his fear. And, I have to laugh and go, think about this. You're a 5-year-old and you start watching that movie, and there's this family and they live in an enemy. Within 5 minutes, a barracuda comes and freaking eats them all. Like, what? Like, wait, what? Like, I think that'd be pretty horrifying if I was 5 years old, but they do it in a way that's it's pretty good. But yeah, the dad has to overcome a lot of fear to be able to accomplish what he did. And so I think it's just a really cool movie. So anyway, dude, these are some rabbit paths, man. We're talking about
Yeah.
Finding Nemo. We've done some
Yeah.
things. What else? Anything else I can be helpful with? I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. There's one question that came to mind before we begin to wrap down this conversation, Steve. As we've alluded to a couple times, a lot of the folks that listen to this show have the big dreams, have the big goals. I actually happen to know a couple who have told me they're writing a book, and it's showing up to do the work, quote unquote, each and every day, writing a page, writing a couple sentences, or maybe it's music. They need to record a song or practice, whatever the goal is. What do you feel like is a through line for the people that end up accomplishing the goal versus those that just kind of stay stuck?
Again, I can only tell you. I feel like I'm going to wake up at 2 in the morning and say, "Oh, I should have said that instead." So just forgive me, but I can tell you the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that. And why not just stick with our theme of movies? So forgive me for that. But have you ever heard the saying, failure is not an option?
Yep. Yeah, from Apollo 13.
Yeah. Well, what I've been saying to people is, I totally understand that. And if you need to bring some men back from a failed lunar mission and make sure that they're alive, I think it's a fine mantra. For the rest of us in life, I find it incredibly damaging.
Mm, okay.
When you write, when you act, when you write music, I think the people that do that the best actually know that failure is an option. Because if failure is not an option, your brain will literally build a block all because it doesn't want to fail. And so learning that failure is an option. In fact, the masters, this is going to sound weird, invite it. It might be the only way to write something great is to fail at it
Mhm.
and be okay with failure, right? So does failure crush you or teach you? But if you
Yeah.
walk out going, I'm going to do this thing and failure is not an option because you heard that somewhere, I will tell you that it's really likely that you will find yourself procrastinating
Yeah.
and putting things off and worrying about the outcome, all because you built in your own mind a construct, like you said, a narrative of failure is not an option. I got a thing for your listeners. Failure is an option. In fact, it might be mandatory, and it's actually okay. Fail well, fail often, and go and fail again and again and again. And for people that are writing books and music and doing art, I get it. It might be what you look like and what people make you feel like and whatever, but It's weird when people have this failure is not an option thing. I've never seen something so damaging to art and to writing and to accomplishment than the concept that failure is not an option. It most certainly is. And when you realize it is, you free your brain to doing some of your best work.
Oh, oh, so good, Steve. We're gonna definitely want to have you back on the show in the future down the road. This has been an absolutely action-packed conversation, so many nuggets. I actually had a lot of personal takeaways, so I want to thank you for that. I want to make sure folks have the ability to connect with you, learn more about Rewire offline. Where are the best places for folks to connect?
Yeah, I mean, our website, Rewire Inc., I tried to get Rewire all those years ago, except it's owned by an electrical company in New Jersey, last I looked, and I just think they were
Oh,
squatting on that. See, I couldn't get Rewire. So Rewire Inc., we have a pretty robust website with some tools and cool things that we do. I'm easily findable on LinkedIn. There's a few Steve Scanlons. I noticed there's a photographer in Boston with my name. Isn't that funny? You look up your own name and you find somebody like you look these people up, like, wait a minute, I'm Steve Scanlon. So I think those are two ways that people can find us and through your show. But I don't try to be overly hidden. I don't do a ton of social media because social media for me personally is one of the things that helps me not be present. And
yeah.
so I don't do Facebook or TikTok or any of those things. Personally, I'm not against them, but for me personally, they end up being pretty big distractions and things that help me not be present.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. And folks, for you, the listeners, we're going to have all of Steve's contact info made readily available in the show notes, as well as this amazing reading list and movie list that you can absolutely get caught up on after the conversation is over. Steve, a question I end the show with every single episode. Want to
Hmm.
ask you, what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
What am I acknowledging myself for today? I feel like I was pretty happy with how we did our work, notwithstanding the fact that it's in the afternoon and early evening for you. I acknowledge that I showed up and I did pretty good because if you knew me, Brother Stewart, you would invite me to do this in the morning, not in the afternoon. I'm not that guy. I don't know. I'm a morning guy and not an afternoon
Mhm.
guy, but I was more than happy to accommodate you and your thing. It's evening for you, so I'm acknowledging the fact that we kept the energy pretty high, notwithstanding the time of day it is, and I'm honored to have been a part of your show, and hopefully the words and thoughts that we drew out can be helpful to people.
Yeah, I know for a fact that they will, Steve. This is an absolutely great conversation, and thank you for doing your part, showing up fully, and I know that this is going to continue to have some ripple effects down the road. And so again, thank
Yeah.
you for being here.
Well, thank you for doing what you do. Your inside track to success is reaching some really amazing people and, your evidence of stepping out and doing stuff. We're not just talking about it, you're doing stuff. And so
Thank
congratulations
you.
on the work that you do and keep doing it.